All right, everybody, welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started here. So thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. My name is Claire Muñoz, and I am the Charles N. Mathewson Senior Director of Education. I'm joined today by my co-host, Craig Rosen, Director of the Nevada STEM Networks and Administrator for Desert Research Institute's Office of Education, Community Engagement, and Professional Development. We're so happy to welcome all of you here today. The 2021 NV STEAM Conference has been underway since Wednesday. And for those of you who have joined us for all of the sessions, thank you. For those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. Before we get started today, we're going to take a moment to acknowledge our sponsors. The 2021 NV STEAM Conference lead sponsor is Tesla. Tesla is also the sponsor for all of our STEAM education programs here at the museum. Additional support for the conference is provided by Nevada Gold Mines. The NV STEAM Conference is co-presented by the Nevada Museum of Art and Desert Research Institute Science Alive program. This conference is supported by the Nevada Department of Education, the Nevada Governor's Office of Science, Innovation and Technology, the Nevada STEM Advisory Council, and the NV STEAM Subcommittee. For all of our educators joining us today, we do want to remind you that we're tracking your participation across the conference. Your total hours are based on the sessions you attend live. Continuing education certificates will be issued by DRI and will be emailed approximately 4 weeks from the conference closing. This year, we're also pleased to offer annual membership to our active Nevada K-12 teachers. We'll drop that link into the chat here in just a minute. And educator memberships are sponsored by Clark Sullivan Construction, Martin Ironworks, RHP Mechanical Systems, and Stitzer Drywall. Before we get going, oh, here we go, Craig.
It's my time now.
It's your turn.
We have just a little bit of housekeeping. So first, please note we're recording all of our sessions today. So you may choose to have your camera on or off. It's really up to you. If you want to be the next YouTube star, keep it on for sure. Next, I would like to remind you to please keep your mic muted during the presentation. You're encouraged to use our chat to communicate with the community and with one another, but please no live communicating. We have a really exciting day planned for you, and our transitions are going to be pretty quick throughout the day, from our opening keynote this morning to our workshops. So please remember to use the conference platform at nvsteam.org to access your next session. We have a special feature today. If you need help, there's going to be a little chat bubble on nvsteam.org for technical assistance. So if you find yourselves lost, go to that chat bubble and somebody will be there live to answer you and help you. Following our 2 workshop sessions today, we'll reconvene at noon for a conference closing, where we'll synthesize our conference with reflections and an opportunity to look towards the future. The Nevada STEAM Conference is Nevada's largest event dedicated to the exploration of ideas and strategies to implement science, technology, engineering, arts, and math into classroom practices. So over the past 7 years, our collaborative efforts between DRI and the Nevada Museum of Art have truly produced the most memorable and meaningful professional development conferences for educators throughout Nevada. As we enter our keynote today and our subsequent workshops, it's our goal to introduce you to artists, designers, and educators who leverage creative processes, including the design thinking process, to discover innovative solutions to real-world and out-of-this-world problems. We hope you'll all find moments of inspiration and intrigue that you will be able to translate the core STEAM concepts of these keynotes and workshops into your classrooms as you usher the next generation of creative problem solvers into the future.
Thanks, Craig. If you joined us last night, you would have experienced a walkthrough of the STEAM backdrop exhibition, We Belong Here. This exhibition, curated by the museum's curator of contemporary art, Joanne Northrup, looks at extreme environments, from the Arctic Circle to outer space, environments that have long provoked curiosity and wonder. In more recent times, these seeming uninhabitable places have attracted attention as potential sites for development, future migration, and colonization. Armed with this awareness, artists, designers, and engineers have worked across disciplines to power innovation, question existing systems, and seek visionary solutions to help navigate the future of extremes. These practitioners help us understand our connection to this world and other worlds. They tackle difficult concepts, making the inaccessible accessible and the invisible visible. The artists and designers featured in We Belong Here comment on the shifting geopolitics of extreme environments and encourage us to consider the planets of our solar system as potential destinations. Part of the work included in the exhibition is a series of space travel posters by the studio at NASA JPL titled Visions of the Future. NASA JPL's goal is to advance the edge of possibility and inspire new generations of innovators and explorers who will help bring these visions of the future to reality and inspire architects of the future. With that, it gives me great pleasure to welcome and introduce you today to Dan Goods, Kat Park, and Lizbeth Torre. Dan Goods is a visual strategist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Dan leads the studio, an amazing team of creatives who transform complex concepts into meaningful stories that can be universally understood. The studio's work can be seen in public spaces, art museums, and even outer space. Kat J. Park is a concept designer at JPL. She's embedded in various teams and investigates creative design and communication in formulation and concept development for space missions. She is a design and strategy consultant for exploration ground systems at Kennedy Space Center and leads tasks related to unpacking and articulating large and complex systems at JPL. Finally, Lizbeth Torre is a creative technologist with the studio at JPL. Liz uses design thinking methods and techniques to imagine the future of technology in space. Liz works on bio-inspired origami robots and mission formulation. Her current research examines the intersection of creativity and aerospace and how creative techniques are of benefit to space technology innovation. And if you want to know what an origami robot is, we're going to learn about that. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan, to Lizbeth, and Kat, and thank you for joining us here today.
Howdy, can you hear me? I just had a crazy thing happen with my computer here. So I think I'm all set up. So, hey everybody, Dan and Kat and Liz, and super excited to be with you today. If you've never seen the Jet Propulsion Lab, this is a picture of it. And it's a big place. So there's about 7,000 people that work there. There's about 3 to 500 scientists and 3,000 to 4,000 engineers, because any one of their ideas takes a lot of people to help put it together. And one cool thing is that next week, or actually a few days from now, on February 18th, we're going to land the next rover on Mars. And we're super excited about that. So tune in. Hopefully you can show your classes. But this is the kind of place that I never ever imagined that I'd be working at. When I was in high school, you all probably would have just kind of shook your head. I slept through 2 of my classes. One of them I got a C, one of them I got an A, and I was like, hey, you know, that's not too bad. And it wasn't that I was a bad student. It wasn't that I didn't know what was going on. I just didn't actually care. And I hadn't found a passion. I didn't find something that I was willing to stay up all night and lose myself in it, because I just didn't know, I loved it so much. But after I got done with high school, I was working at a place and I was doing little newsletters and logos and stuff like that. And the guy asked me, he spoke into my life. He was like, have you ever thought about going to an art school? And that was the last thing ever on my mind. I'd never taken an art class. I never drew. It was never something in my family. But when I got home, on my bed was a postcard from an art school. And I was like, oh my goodness, what was the world telling me? And so literally 6 months later, I ended up moving to Seattle, going to a little art school. Eventually, I ended up getting to get into Art Center College of Design. And as I drove down from Seattle down to Pasadena, there was this moment when there's these 2 signs, and one says Art Center College of Design, which I was so excited to be able to be a part of and go to. And then right next to it is this NASA JPL sign. And I just couldn't believe that these 2 places lived right next to each other. You can literally walk between the 2 places. And so, but I never imagined that I'd get to work there. Well, now it's been about 18 years. I have an amazing, amazing team of super talented people from all sorts of different backgrounds, whether it's advertising or illustration or special effects or producing, making music videos, all sorts of different stuff. And we'll be able to share a little bit of what we do today. And what we call ourselves the studio. And we kind of do these 2 different things. One is that we help people think through their thinking. And that's sort of the idea, is that like, we don't know all the, engineering lingo. We don't know how to do all the math, but we ask questions that are different than the other people's peers ask. And when you're being asked questions that are different, you start to have a little bit of different insight into what's going on. And then we also have this term we call sneaking up on learning. And it's really about making something that's beautiful, mysterious, that draws you in. And then hopefully you're in the mindset for learning at that moment. So this is mission control at the Jet Propulsion Lab. We control all the data for about 40 different spacecrafts from all over the world, from the Europeans, NASA, the Japanese, all go through this building. And I get a live feed from that. And so when lights are coming down, that means that we are receiving data from a spacecraft at that moment. When lights are going up, that means that we're sending data to a spacecraft at that moment. And then the amount of data is represented by how much light you see. So Voyager, which is beyond the edge of the solar system, it's been going for 40 years. It can hardly send any data back and forth. It kind of sends these little drips of data back. But other spacecraft can send tons and tons of data. And so you really get that sense of the heartbeat of space exploration. And this is in the main administration building at JPL. Hopefully someday we'll, I think the California Science Center is going to put in a 40-foot version of it. This was done by Lois Kim, another person on the team. This is called Line of Sight, and it's these robotic signs that point to things in space. And it started out as just this little drawing, thought, oh, this will be super simple. But turns out to make these things work is really complicated. We ended up working with a bunch of different robotics people, mechanical engineers, lighting people, facilities people. But it's really beautiful. You just kind of walk out there, and the first day it was put up, the people who actually track all the things in space were standing out there with their laptops. And it was such a beautiful moment when they're like, oh, it's actually working. Because we were afraid that, perhaps it wasn't going to work. And at night, this is our sort of mall area. They turn red so that it doesn't blow your eyes when you're trying to look up at the stars. And so someday we hope to have some of these out in national parks, like Joshua Tree, or perhaps somewhere out by you, so you'd kind of wander along, and then all of a sudden you would see this thing pointing to things in space. And if you did get to see some of the travel posters, is quite a process. And I just wanted to kind of mention a little bit about how these things got put together. So these are called the Visions of the Future travel series. You can easily Google them. David Delgado's on the left right there, and he's the one who really spearheaded this project. And we ended up brainstorming with lots and lots of people, whether they're scientists or engineers or the mailman to other communicators. We wanted to get everyone's opinions on what's special about these planets that we're finding that are around other stars. And this particular one was really fascinating because the scientists said, oh, nobody would ever want to go to this place, not because the name is so bizarre, but because it doesn't have a sun. So it's always dark there. And so how do you get people to go to this place? No one's going to be able to see anything. And so we tried to make this negative into a positive, and it's where the nightlife never ends. And so David put together this little mood board after we'd kind of finally figured out what the main concept was. Joby Harris did a whole bunch of different illustrations, and eventually it became the piece that it was. So this is sort of like the Vegas of the galaxy. And then we ended up doing a whole bunch more. There's a whole bunch of other ones that are out there right now. So I hope that you can go and you can download these things. They're super. We put the highest resolution on there, so you should be able to get things that you can print out about 10 feet tall if you want.
And just to let everybody know today, we're going to go ahead and drop the link into where you can print these to the session. So if you go back to the schedule, you'll be able to access this. We're also going to mail a set of these to everybody who participated. So that's a nice little gift and takeaway we'll be sending in the next couple of weeks.
Awesome. That's super cool. So I'm going to hand it over to Liz.
Hi there. Thank you. Yeah, and so thank you everyone for joining and being with us here. My name is Liz. I'm a creative technologist in the studio. And a little bit about me. Actually in the series that Dan just shared, I illustrated Europa and Ceres. So just so you know, that was me. Those are mine that I illustrated. And so a little bit about my background. So my family is from Zacatecas, Mexico, and I'm here in Altadena, California, working for JPL. And since unlike Dan, when I was very little, around 5 years old, I knew I wanted to be an artist and designer. And I was really excited about drawing, just drawing and storytelling. I would watch a lot of movies, Saturday morning cartoons, everything, and really wanted in my life to explore how to tell stories through drawing. And so that led me to Art Center College of Design, where I studied entertainment art, which is designing, for me, designing characters, vehicles, and environments for feature film. And I was really excited to draw very rapidly and sketching, and that really helped at JPL. So once I started at JPL, I worked for a series of missions for the Rosetta mission as their lead designer, as an intern there, all the way up to my time with the studio. And Dan, if you can go to the next slide, please. So during my 6 years with the studio, my work started to become a little more technical, and I realized that I needed a master's degree to be able to work on space missions and the things that I really wanted to work on. And so I went to MIT for graduate school, and to learn how to make those drawings that I was drawing come to life in different ways, sometimes through movement, through technology, and even took a science fiction course, science fiction fabrication, where we learned how to take the powers of superheroes and use technology to make them real. So like Spider-Man Spidey sense and those sorts of things. And this was a really wonderful program. And so that really led me to origami robotics, which I was fortunate enough to take at MIT and Harvard. And what this was is, so this course, informal robotics that I was able to take at Harvard really jump-started my love of origami and robotics. And really what it is origami is a wonderful art form and way of taking complex movements and complex engineering linkages and simplifying them down into these really beautiful tessellations, and also kind of creating beautiful forms that are a little more pleasing to the eye than traditional robots might be, and creating robots that are more lifelike in their movements. And so this kind of really took me into taking inspiration from animals and using origami to design what they look like and how they move, and simplifying those complex movements. And Dan, if you can go into the next slide. This is just an example of what a robot might look like. So we have our form, a shell. This was inspired by a mollusk, and the little wings on the sides, they pinch together to create a walking movement. And if you can go on to the next slide, please. So this is just an example of the process and what that process looks like. So I'll always start with a drawing. So I have a butterfly that I might be researching, and I really take time to kind of dissect how it moves, exactly how the wings connect to the body, and then start to imagine what folds might look like, that if you attach a motor to it, it can move. And so it translates into, then I go into computer software to develop a flat-facing piece. And you actually might notice the red and blue lines. If you've ever done origami before, you know that you have mountain and valley folds. It's exactly the same movement. And I love this because you can start with paper at home. Any paper that you have, you can always take it and start just creating things. And so if you can go on to the next slide, please. If you wouldn't mind. And so this is just a video of a very rough video of how we might take that movement and create a model of that. And so this is just how that happens. And so origami is really wonderful in that, it's an art form, a very beautiful art form. And it can also have these mathematical properties to it that can allow us to create robots from that. So thank you. And I think I can pass it on to Kat.
Hi, everybody. Hope everyone can hear me. I'm Kat. I'm a designer at JPL. This is a picture of me wearing one of my many hats. I'm in an A-team study. The A stands for architecture, as in mission architecture. And this is a group that helps teams on lab plan missions in space. So I'm a concept designer, which means that I help bring concepts from vision to reality through design. And I feel like I have one of the coolest jobs in the world, and one that I'm kind of simultaneously pinching myself and asking, like, how did I get here and how do I get to do this? And also kind of feeling like it was a little bit what I was meant to do. So I'll try to draw a clean line through my education up until this point. So Dan, if you wanna, so if I track my path from the space camp at Kennedy Space Center to where I am now, in hindsight, a lot of this makes perfect sense, because I think I've always just been interested in, like, how did they do that cool thing that they just did? I've never really been a huge fan of the show in front of the curtain. I've always kind of wanted to see what happens behind the scenes. So whether it was me being a 10-year-old wanting astronaut training or wanting to know how theme parks worked. One of my first jobs was to be a concept designer for Disney Imagineering. So I also went to Art Center of College of Design to learn how to draw concept art. I was really interested in learning how to design theme parks and video games and sci-fi films. And I just really liked figuring out how things would work all together in such an interactive space. And I ended up getting a lot of that at Disney Imagineering, where I literally worked in a trailer backstage at Disneyland. So I would wake up at 4 a.m. every morning to drive to Anaheim and walk through the park before it opened as part of my job, and because I would be walking to my office. And I just got to see a lot of the planning and the layers of the system and the process that it took to run the park. And I felt like I wanted to do more than just kind of draw decorative overlays or think of like what the next ride might look like. I wanted to design the system itself. There were certain points where I was up in the fake windows of the fake buildings, testing like a piece of software or turning it on and off in a hidden computer so people could test it, or crawling under buildings. And I just really liked that perspective. And at Disney, there's a reason for everything. You walk through the park the way you walk it because Disney wanted you to do it. So I was really fascinated by this. So every time I visited like a website or a museum or anything that was slightly interactive, I would start kind of diagramming out the steps that I took and trying to figure out like, why was I clicking a particular button, or like what's going on here? I was trying to look beneath the surface. I think in this particular case, I was trying to buy some makeup, and I was really interested in like all the ingredients that were listed, but they weren't like cross-referenced with each other. So it's kind of hard to like pick a scheme. But yeah, I was just kind of pulling things apart and trying to see how it worked. And then I would kind of try to see if there was a way that I could redesign it in a way that was more engaging or more elegant. And I filled a bunch of notebooks with these kinds of weird little sketches. And I was like, nobody's gonna like this. This is just for me. But actually the studio really wanted it because this was part of my first job when I showed up at JPL. I called the studio and they were looking for someone who could sort of visualize things really quickly through sketching, but could also handle a level of engineering and science information and to pull it apart into something really understandable. So the first task they gave me was to draw a large-scale diagram of an astrophysics concept called SphereX that would achieve multiple layers of science with a really simple science operations concept for something called a site visit, which is basically like it's kind of like a test. NASA reviewers come in and decide whether they should fund something to be a mission or not. So it was really important that this proposal team communicated this. So I didn't just kind of do it by I didn't show up and go like, okay, I get it. Like, let me just draw this. I actually went into the principal investigator, Jamie Bach's office hours, and I studied the concept and I learned all of this from him. And we would kind of pass a piece of paper back and forth. And I would draw something and he would draw something until we figured out what this entire thing could be illustrated as. So the next slide is a photo of me looking through all my notes and all my doodles and kind of studying it to try to figure out like how am I supposed to draw this thing? And then, so yeah, that's a little screen cap of me studying really hard, trying to figure out like, am I doing this right? So one of the best parts of this was that we had a family night where the team's families came to see what the team was working on. And I saw a lot of young kids really interested in the drawings, and I felt like it had a huge positive impact on them. And any opportunity to make science accessible and exciting to a young person's mind and make them want to interact with it is really an opportunity I want to take. But then Dan asked me if I would like to do the same thing for a different and slightly more critical crowd, which is the A team. So this is how I joined the A team. So the A team is a group, like I said before, for concept development at JPL, and they run design sprints called studies, where they look at concept proposals and try to solve whatever problems the team needs to solve in order to develop it into something that could be funded. So this is a room full of scientists and engineers, systems engineers, managers running programmatics and cost analysis. So it's like a 10-sided Rubik's Cube. And every day is a little bit intimidating because I don't really know what this room full of PhDs is going to talk about. But I basically do the same thing I did with Jamie for Sphere X, which is I listen to what they're saying, I visualize it, and then we expand on it by questioning it, adding it to it, or taking things away. We clarify important points, and we come up with a more developed concept than before, having sort of picked the concept apart and put it back together. And this has allowed me to do some pretty incredible work with some pretty incredible people. I've also been to the Johnson Space Center, visited the Veggie Lab at Kennedy Space Center. So I feel like this kind of weird line of me just liking drawing and liking pulling little systems apart has created a bunch of really amazing opportunities. But the one that I think that I'm the proudest of, and I think that a lot of people who were on this team maybe feel the same way, is the Vital project at JPL. And obviously, we're all aware of the situation that healthcare providers needed a great deal of support because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And a few people at JPL wanted to see if they could create a very much needed ventilator using parts outside of a normal supply chain from other ventilators. And the way that the studio participated was kind of in numerous ways. What started out as a little paper diagram turned into an actual working, tested and FDA approved ventilator in a matter of months. And Dan knows the real numbers, but a lot of different licenses have been issued for many different countries around the world to help the COVID patients. And the studio helped in a lot of ways, not only documenting the process and standing up the rapid design environment to be COVID safe. So think webcams in different rooms so we could separate the team but still communicate, putting together presentations and infographics to help communicate the process to major stakeholders and to prove concept viability. And Dan actually printed out the first stickers that went on the first prototype. And I did the same kind of drawing things to provide clarity in the parts and functions by diagramming it out for the engineers. And that's me in the little bottom right corner, wearing my usual gear, very happy to help and super happy that it's all working. So that's my portion of it.
Cool. Well, I think we're all done with that portion.
Excellent. So between the one of the themes of the conference is design thinking. And Dan, I spoke to you about this earlier, when we were asking you to present, and you kind of just laughed at me and you said, well, isn't that what everybody does all the time? So the design thinking process, we opened our conference on Wednesday night with an introduction to that and how teachers might be able to apply that to their classroom. And that involves, empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. So following those steps, this is kind of what you do every day, all day. Kat, Lizbeth, Dan, can you give us an example of maybe another example, perhaps Lizbeth, because Kat just shared with us, of how you were able to take a large challenge and break it down and really apply that design thinking process to coming up with a solution to a big problem?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, and so the design process, there's a lot of different methods to design thinking. However, that method that you just mentioned, standardized by Stanford's D School and IDEO.org, are wonderful methods, and actually something that we used for a project that we had centered with Lois Kim, centered on astronaut devices and wearables. So we had a big task of, in one workshop, kind of imagining how JPL or how future astronauts might interact with our robots once they get to space. And so we actually led, and usually those workshops are led by engineers and scientists, and they use very different methods than we do of running those workshops. But we were able to use the design thinking method to run the entire shop ourselves, and even invited some Hollywood designers to the table, which, you know, JPL engineers don't usually work with them, to kind of imagine in a very big way how that might happen. And so a lot of it was also about situational awareness and including different disciplines that might not normally be included in a room like that. Us being designers, having a Hollywood designer, and then also scientists and engineers really kind of elevated that space and created bigger ideas than we normally might see in that space.
Yeah, wonderful. And you all are really working across disciplines. How is the reception amongst the scientists and engineers when, you know, these creatives walk into the room? What is that experience like?
Well, it's changed over time. So when I was first there, I remember I was in a meeting and I was only given 6 months. So they said, you know, we give you 6 months. We don't know what it is that you do, but we'll see what it is and we'll go from there. And it was a couple months in, and there's like 120 people in the room, and they put up a little org chart. And one of them said, you know, at that time it was called Artists in Residence, and some guy, you know, called out like, why are we paying this person? You know, we should be paying more engineers. And I was in the room, right? So JPLers have no problem, you know, speaking it as they see it. And so you have to have a tough skin. And fortunately, Art Centered sort of prepared me for that type of thing. But yeah, so like that was sort of the mentality at the beginning. It was like, why aren't we paying for more engineers? We need to be paying for them. But over time, you know, I think people started to realize that, oh, maybe they bring something to the table that maybe the rest of us are, you know, don't. And so it's been amazing to watch over, you know, 18 years or so, 17, 18 years, to see sort of a cultural shift in like, why in the world should they be there, to we have to have them at the beginning. You know, JPL is a big place, so there are plenty of teams that, you know, still don't know that we exist and maybe not, you know, see what kind of value we can bring. But there's a number of teams now that, like, that's what they want at the very beginning, like when they first get together, is to make sure that someone from our team or someone like us from the outside is there to help.
You mentioned asking kind of questions. Well, I think Dan mentioned asking questions that other people don't ask. Can you talk a little bit about that experience? And you were relaying a little bit of intimidation walking into a room of PhDs. How do you think that your perspective changes the way that they might look at their own projects?
Yeah, so to answer the part about walking into a room, I feel so I never really know what concept I'm going to be tackling that day. I think we get a little bit of a prep, and if I can, I try to read everybody's papers and I try to go through everybody's presentations. But obviously, that's a ton of work, and some of their papers are like 300 pages long. So it's kind of a lot about just listening, and I think not being afraid to ask the question, because a lot of times there are questions that most people in the room have, but for whatever reason, they're like, oh, I'm a PhD, I should really know this, or I don't want to ask that question. But for me, it's kind of like, I need to ask the question or else I'm not going to get any of it. So it's kind of being interested and willing to unpack the things that most people are, for whatever reason, not going to unpack, or a little bit afraid to unpack. And I think for me, that's really kind of it. I don't think I've ever been afraid of walking into a room and kind of being like, well, can you explain it a different way, because I might not be getting it. I don't know if that answers your question.
Ultimately, you're responsible for translating it too. So making, like I said, the inaccessible accessible. Dan, I saw you unmute there. Did you want to weigh in on that?
I was just testing my keyboard. So.
check. We have a really wonderful video. We're getting a lot of comments in the chat here. Craig, I know you've been watching the chat. Is there anything you want to bring?
Yeah. You know, we hosted, DRI hosted the Chief Science Officer for NASA, who was responsible for launching Perseverance into space. And we're really excited for the countdown with you on the 18th. So 12 days from now, I'm sure it's on your calendar. But there was a question of whether you were involved in the design at all. or did they use any artists for that?
We can't tell you about those parts.
Okay, but you can nod your head.
JPL is under a lock and key, I think, on a lot of things.
We're not able to go there, gang. So
I cannot confirm nor deny things. So
there's a lot of people in the chat who are asking for this content and have been really inspired by the work that you do and think that this would be inspiring for their students. We are recording today's session and we are intending to make that available to conference registrants later. So how you choose to share that with your students is up to you. We also are going to have a downloadable origami robot, courtesy of Lizbeth, that we will share. Craig, was there any others, any other things from the chat that we want to hit here?
No, that was the big question of the day. I'm still waiting for others, but if you have a question, send it directly to me.
Put it in the chat there. The other thing we're going to do is share a video talking about the ventilator project. So this is like one of those where you really had to apply design thinking. You needed a very quick product, and you had a big challenge ahead of you. So I'm going to go ahead and share it. It's about a 2.5-minute video. So let me pull that up here for everyone.
We are designing an easy and rapidly mass manufacturable ventilator device, and it is a crazy project.
This crisis is unprecedented in our lives and requires unprecedented action.
I'm so amped up. I mean, it really, the adrenaline rush, it's exciting, but it's exhausting. And I think we all just want to do everything we can to try to help.
You ready?
Yeah. Oh, very cool. That's awesome.
I would say the biggest personal challenges that I have myself is I don't have time to sleep.
I think what JPL brings to the table is extraordinary talent. It also brings to the table tremendous innovation. The third thing it brings to the table is tremendous focus. The other thing that I felt, I see it in our team, and that is a call to duty. I have this talent, I'm an engineer or a scientist, I can do something.
We have the potential to save human lives, people that we might know, our neighbors, our families. And that intensity, amazing. It's amazing. And as stressful as this has been for everybody in the last couple of weeks, not one of us can stop.
That was pretty incredible. Thank you for sharing that with all of us. Dan, do you want to talk to us a little bit about the studio's involvement in this project and how it came to fruition?
Yeah, I mean, it was really crazy. So two people had bumped into each other at lunchtime on like a Friday, and they were both like really high-level engineers, and they saw, you know, what was sort of coming down the pike, and it was right before everything closed down, and they said, you know, we should, you know, is what I'm doing right now the most important thing I should be doing? And one of the guys went home that weekend, built a team, found some funding, and got a doctor from our local hospital to come over and tell everybody about what a ventilator is on the Monday. And then a few days later, they sent me an email, and they actually asked for two things, a visual strategist, because that's sort of what we call ourselves, and a chief culturalist. And I was like, I don't know what this is, but I'd love to help. And you know, at the very beginning, I just started to take pictures because I realized that this was like a historic moment. And so like all that footage, there's only a few people on the lab, you know, maybe 20, 30 people. Everyone else was at home. And so they didn't get to see any of this. And so I'd send out the pictures, you know, in movies, and people sort of felt like they were part of it. So that culturalist was part of that. And then eventually got the whole team, pretty much the whole team involved, and everything from the UX and the UI design, the experience of how to use this thing, because the engineers were mainly thinking about how do I make, you know, this thing work to this thing and not kill somebody, right? They weren't thinking about like the person that needs to press the buttons or the alarms that go off all the time, or like what thing do I need to see first, blinking. And so all of us, you know, we're working all hours of the day and night, every weekend for a month, trying to figure out how to do that, interviewing doctors and that sort of thing, as well as like all the documentation. There's tons and tons and tons of presentations and documentation that needed to happen to get FDA approval. And so there's a whole, you know, crowd of people working on that, as well as we also wanted to add a little human touch to it, because I actually ended up in the process of this. I ended up going to the hospital thinking that I was having a heart attack. I ended up having a, what do you call it? A panic attack. I'd never had one of those before. And I, you know, looking at all the stuff that was around me, nothing really felt like it was there to help me physically, but it wasn't there to help me emotionally and mentally. And so we all worked on coming up with like this little flower that would go on the ventilator itself, so that the person pressing the button, the doctor and the nurse, the practitioners pressing the button all the time, you know, just kind of had something that lifted their spirits through the day. And so, and I'm sure I'm missing, you know, a bunch of other stuff that we worked on, but there's a bunch of different areas. And so it was kind of neat, because the team didn't necessarily know us that much. And over time, they, you know, they would start to say, well, can you help us with this? You know, help us think through this, help us think through that. Kat worked a lot on the, like the instructions on how to do that, but that it wasn't just for the end user. It was actually for the engineers trying to figure out how their thing worked, you know, in real time, because everything was moving so fast.
Yeah. So Kat, you were involved in that project too. Do you want to weigh in and give us some of your feedback and experience?
Yeah, it was incredibly fast paced. And I think that's one of the reasons why having somebody who could sketch or ideate really rapidly helped a lot. Like Dan said, there were a lot of moving pieces. So it was everything like, do we turn this way or this way? Does it turn to the right or to the left? And just having somebody who could really quickly gather everybody in a room, diagram the whole thing out, how it would work, and make sure that everybody was on the same page, so that they could also then go leave and work on the parts that they needed to work on, while having all the same knowledge in their head, rather than people sort of assuming that something was going to work a particular way and then it not working that way. And so, like Dan said, it was helping the engineers sort of solve their problems on their end, but then I was also using that information to feed an end user product, which was how to use the ventilator. So the instruction manuals and the manual for use. So that was pretty incredible.
So engineers apply the design thinking process all the time. Designers apply the design thinking process all the time. Engineers in many ways are designers, but a lot of designers don't consider themselves engineers. Maybe Lizbeth, could you talk a little bit about how those two play together? And then Dan, you want to jump in there too?
Yeah, and yeah, so there's an interesting thing there, and actually something that I had to wrestle with actually when I jumped into MIT, is that you know, coming from a background where everyone is a designer at the school at my undergrad, and then at MIT where there are no designers almost, and it's all engineers and scientists, and really it's all, I found that it's all. We all do research, but the way that it's documented is very different. So for engineers and scientists, you have to write research papers, and you write a lot, and you document with models, 3D models. For designers, our research is maybe on Post-it notes, and we iterate very quickly, and our it's less quantitative and it's less qualitative and more quantitative, the sorts of research that designers do. And so those are, while they're very different, they're also very similar. And so there's a bridge there that can be bridged just by you know, understanding that, you know, they actually do very similar things. And I'm always hesitant to say that, you know, engineers aren't creative because they are, and designers aren't engineers because I do engineering quite a bit. So it's always kind of a weird line there.
Yeah, one of the things JPL is known for is called systems engineering. And so it's, you know, when you have a super complicated, if you look at the rover, there's like a billion different little parts and someone has to be thinking about the whole system, because most of the time people are thinking about their little element of it, and someone needs to be thinking about the overall thing. And whenever we do like one of those art installations that you saw earlier, like I feel like we have to be systems engineers because we're creating something no one had created before, and we're doing something new. And so people only know their little area, but we have to think about the entire thing. And again, as Liz said, you know, like everyone is creative, right? Everyone's creative, and they're just different phases of a project. And early on, you can have crazy, wild ideas, but at some point, you have to just crunch the numbers, and you have, you know, don't have room for thinking outside the box, because you got to like make this thing. And so I remember when I first got there, I proposed this one project, and the first question the person asked me was, "What's your D-scopes?" And I was like, "D-scope? We're not D-scoping anything, right?" This is the art piece, right? No, it's been fascinating to work with everyone, and just as in the rest of life, you know, stereotypes don't hold. You know, I love the people we work with, and even the people they're asking you about de-scoping, because they're trying to think ahead about like, what if something is too hard and you can't do it or is impossible, then what are your backups? And you always want to have a backup.
Excellent. What is de-scoping now?
Oh yeah, de-scoping.
The big question.
Yeah. You might also hear it in architecture when they call it value engineering, and it's the bane of every architect. It's sort of like you have a big grand plan, and if it costs too much or it's too hard, what are the areas that you can take out that still keep the integrity of the concept? And so you're de-scoping, you're just, you know, you're not going to do those types of things. And so, you know, it's hard because you have a dream and a vision for what something might be, but ultimately there's always that moment when it costs too much or there's not enough time, and you have to get down to you always want to hold on to what is the essence of what it is that you're trying to do. And as long as you don't cut off those parts that take away from the essence of what you're trying to do, then perhaps you can do it for less money, or you can do it with different materials. Mm-hmm. And that was actually what was cool about this ventilator, is the normal ventilator costs $40,000. It has thousands of parts, and it's really, really complicated because it can do a lot of different types of things. And this team said, all we care about is COVID. That's all we care about. So what is the least amount of parts that can do that one thing, and make sure we use parts that anybody can buy anywhere in the world. And so people have licensed this in Brazil, in India, in Nigeria, and all over the world. And ours only has like 105 parts. So it's pretty amazing. And that's part of like trying to figure out what you don't need in order so you can get it done quickly, and anyone can use it.
Excellent. We have just about 5 minutes left in today's presentation. I know this is going quickly for everybody, and we would love to hear more. I want to conclude, and Kat, I'm going to start with you. We'll move to Lizbeth, and then we'll end with Dan. But if you could just share the most impactful project. We've spent a lot of time talking about the ventilator, but if there was something else that was just really exciting for you to work on, we'd love for you to share that as we conclude our session today.
So since a lot of my work is in early concept development formulation, there's a ton of it that I can't actually talk about, but on the whole, I feel like, yeah, working with that group, with a team, has been the thing that kind of like really it made a lot of things click for me. So I'm a little bit of a mix of Liz and Dan in terms of, you know, childhood ambition and dreams. I was like a pretty good student and I was really ambitious. I just didn't know what direction to put that in. So I drew like a really straight line where I could say like, here's a picture of me at space camp and here's a picture of me at JPL. But in reality, it was really, really windy for a long time. I was like, am I going to be a lawyer? Am I going to work in children's books? Am I going to like, what do I do with this drawing skill? What do I do with this desire to analyze things? How do I kind of put it all together? And what am I interested in? What problems am I solving? So being able to be in an environment or in a space where I can kind of do all of it, that for me personally has been really, really rewarding and just incredible that I get to wake up every day and think about this kind of thing and hear some of the ideas that I get to hear.
That's incredible. Liz?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, and I guess I can say my favorite project, so I can't really say too much, but I do have a project centered on biomimicry and, you know, taking the movements of animals and making them into robots. And I think my biggest takeaway from my favorite project would be that, you know, even something as simple as a butterfly or a snail is actually very high tech. It's actually quite hard to recreate those movements that you see that, you know, you might walk by snails, you know, every day, but not realize that there's a whole system that runs that animal. And so I think that in recognizing that design and design thinking can, you know, you kind of see everything at a system level in some way similar to engineers, and that they're all very related to each other. And, you know, you can apply that to really anything in life, whether it be snails or butterflies or anything. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Lizbeth. And Dan.
Yeah, maybe one of the things that I did early on was trying to understand how big the universe is and how many planets there are around other stars. And when I first got to JPL, we'd only found like 150. And now there's like, now we basically believe there's a solar system around every star that we see. And so far we've found like 4,000, 5,000 different planets that are out there. And, but early on, I just couldn't wrap my head around trying to find especially Earth-like planets around other stars. And so I ended up taking a grain of sand and I went to the shop at JPL and they had tiny, tiny drill bits. And so I had them drill a hole 1/10 of the size of the grain of sand into the grain of sand. It was with a carbide drill bit. And that hole represented where we had found these thousands of planets around other stars. And we're going to find tens of thousands more within that little hole, let alone the rest of the galaxy. The grain of sand represented our Milky Way galaxy. And then to show all the other galaxies that we know about, you need, at that time, you needed 6 rooms full of sand. Since then, it's turned into 60 rooms full of sand. So I'd have this grain of sand under a magnifying glass and you'd see the little hole and you'd kind of get a sense of either that you're really insignificant or I felt like this shows our significance, that the place that we live is really, really important.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Lizbeth. Thank you, Kat. We're going to drop those resources into the session following the conference, as well as the recording. If any of the 3 of you have additional resources you'd like to send, we can attach that to the session. We do have an audience of K-12, pre-K-12 educators from across the state and actually across the country. So any additional resources would be welcome. Thank you for joining us. For the rest of you, we're going to quickly transition you into your next session. You do want to go back to the nvsteam.org website, click on My Sessions in the upper right corner to access your next workshop. The next workshops will start promptly at 10 o'clock, followed by 11, and then we will reconvene at 12 for the conference ending. Craig, thank you for joining me here today. For our team from the studio, thank you so much for joining us. It was amazing. I have so many more questions to ask. I wish we had more time, and we hope to invite you back. Thank you all.
We appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
That to me is what feminists essentially maneuvered themselves into. I disagree.
Someone's documenting it.
All right, and we're going to go ahead and end this session. Just a reminder for anybody who is left, you do want to exit out of this session, log back into nbsteam.org, click on My Sessions to get to your next workshop, and we will see you in our workshops. Thanks so much for joining us.